Hello, I'm Jenny White. Welcome to this week's edition of Inside Outside, a local news report that follows up on those important stories that have been in the news, which evoke very strong emotions and memories. One such story is Grenfell Tower fire disaster. On the 14th of June 2017, a fire broke out in 24-storey Grenfell Tower block in North Kensington in West London. 72 people died as a result of the fire. More than 70 people were injured and 223 people were escaped from the blaze. More than 200 households were displaced. More than 2 years on from the disaster, which devastated families and communities alike, Inside Outside is here to explore the efforts that have been made since the fire to provide support and counselling for those affected by the tragedy. Grenfell happened in an area of ethnic diversity, where victims' families and survivors, witnesses and services involved in the disaster all had the potential to need specialist help and support and counselling following the fire. There have been well over 2,000 referrals to the Grenfell Tower therapy services for therapy related to post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety. And services have been provided by a number of organisations like the NHS, charities, emergency services and faith groups, to name but a few, and with open access for all ages, genders and cultural groups. Focusing particularly on those services that have provided counselling for those in need, our interviews today are with representatives from 3 services that have been involved from the time of the tragedy and who are still providing and receiving ongoing support. Research has shown that for many people receiving this support, the main issues have been around bereavement, complicated grief and dealing with multiple losses, many related to post-traumatic stress disorder, all of which our specialists today will discuss in more detail. So first we will have Joanne Ferguson. She's a spokesperson from West London Fire Service. She'll be followed by Erica Harkness, clinical psychologist from West London NHS Trust. And lastly, we'll hear from Jane Bowman, local church lead for multicultural church groups in the area.
Firstly, I would like to point out that the psychological impact on the firefighters involved at Grenfell Tower has been immense. There has also been significant impact on the call operators who handled many calls from residents of Grenfell and concerned members of the public. Over the course of the operation, 250 firefighters attempted to control the blaze, and there were more than 100 firefighters in the building at any one time. A major incident such as this is rare, but the firefighters responded with courage and heroism. The tragedy has left many firefighters with debilitating mental health issues, such as depression and struggling to carry out normal routines of everyday life. Firefighters are generally very resilient people, but for the firefighters and other emergency service personnel involved, it is normal for symptoms of traumatic stress to occur. A senior firefighter has reported that fire and rescue staff were so badly shaken that they needed professional help. 800 staff have had counselling, with some having continued support. London Fire Brigade's counselling and trauma team have treated more than 157 personnel since the Grenfell fire, and the Wellbeing Service have seen over 600 staff. A significant number of staff have been treated for post-traumatic stress disorder as they experience the traumatic effects of dealing with such an horrific event. When a person suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder, they often relive the traumatic event through nightmares and flashbacks, and can have difficulty sleeping and struggle to concentrate. The symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder are enough to have a significant impact on a person's life. Various therapies such as cognitive behavioural therapy and person-centred therapy have been employed within the London Fire Brigade counselling service to offer continued support. One firefighter described scenes of complete devastation and horror. Firefighters had been particularly affected when a family, out of desperation, had thrown a child from a window in an attempt to save him from the fire. another firefighter repeatedly climbed a smoke-filled stairwell, trying desperately to rescue a 12-year-old girl. Many officers recall having conversations with residents that they knew they would not be able to save. The Grenfell Tower fire has stirred up memories for retired fighters also. One retired firefighter recalls sitting in a pub and suddenly he burst into tears, uncontrollable sobbing. Across the front of his eyes you could see images of nearly every dead person he had dealt with. This retired firefighter was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder and went on to receive psychological treatment through the firefighters' charity, a charity set up to rescue the rescuers and help them to recover their lives. Complex post-traumatic stress disorder can occur when a person repeatedly deals with traumatic situations and can develop many years after the event. Sadly, for some people suffering from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, it can cause a number of problems such as self-harming, substance misuse, work-related problems and breakdown of relationships. An organisation which has been involved in the support of the firefighters is Mind. Mind have a dedicated programme for people working in the emergency services. The Blue Light programme, as it's called, delivers mental health support to staff and volunteers across the police, fire and ambulance and search and rescue services in England and Wales. London Fire Brigade as an organisation continue to offer support to all members of the emergency services who need our help.
The Grenfell Tower fire has been a very emotional, devastating and horrific incident, leaving people feeling anxious, frightened, lost and bereft. The community, residents and families, along with the firefighters, have had to witness some shocking scenes with terrible images etched on their minds, and this they must live with forever. The NHS has been very much involved in the counselling and supporting of residents, survivors and bereaved families of the victims. With such a traumatic happening as this, people are likely to become traumatised, suffer severe shock, and they may feel grief, anxiety, relief, pain, guilt or anger, which in turn can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of people in situations like this find the after effects of trauma very distressing and continue to need support in the long term. These people are given the support that is needed by treating them in a person-centred approach, using the core conditions of unconditional positive regard, congruency, empathy, and so trying to help their mental state. Grief is a normal and natural reaction to a loss, loss being the attachment or bond that has been formed with that person. But there are different stages of grief, and as we encounter various people within the community, it is clear that everyone experiences grief in their own way, as do they express their loss in different ways. Bereavement is a painful and tough process to work through. Some people work through this period in an uncomplicated manner, showing normal reaction to loss as an adaptive process of healing, and may show sorrow, pain, or numbness. Gradually these feelings ease, and the person accepts the loss. However, there is also complicated grief or unresolved grief, which is a complex type of bereavement, when a person becomes stuck or frozen in their grief. Their emotions are so painful and severe, they are unable to process this loss, carry out normal routine, or move forward with their own life. As counsellors, we recognise the different stages of grief and work through different models of grieving. Some people cope better with grief by focusing on memories of a loved one, remembering songs, looking at photographs, and trying to stay closely connected to them by memory and senses. This is known as loss-orientated grief, which is a dual-purpose model and goes along with restoration-orientated grief, which is when a person likes to keep busy, not allowing themselves to focus on the pain. Without realising it, people may go back and forth between the two as in an oscillating manner, thereby keeping the memory of the loved one alive but detracting from focusing on their pain. Denial to loss may occur for a person, and for them to be able to move on, they need to work through tasks in the process of mourning. There is no timeline for completing the tasks, and they may need revisiting. The first task in being able to accept what has happened and to understand the reality of loss. Secondly, they must try and work through the pain by understanding these emotions and acknowledging them. Thirdly, adjusting to life as it is without the deceased. This requires developing skills to perhaps take on the roles that the deceased used to do. The fourth task to overcome is being able to move on with their life, keeping an ongoing connection emotionally with the person who has died, but reinvesting in a new relationship. Most cultures have rituals of mourning after death, but the bereavement process varies between different cultures. Crying may be a common emotion, regardless of the person's origin, but the cultural values may be affected by a person's attitude toward death. We recognise the difference between the Western culture and other cultures. Some Western cultures display death-denying traits, often depicted as something to fight or resist. Meanwhile, other cultures consider death more of a transition than an end. Death-denying cultures tend to have more anxiety around death than other cultures. When working with individuals in grief, therapists may need to keep cultural influences in mind.
I'm a representative of 9 faith groups from the diverse multicultural area of North Kensington who supported the bereaved at the Grenfell fire. This area of London has many nationalities and many religions. I have spoken to many faith leaders, faith psychotherapists and lay people who all played their part that night in providing survivors with spiritual help, shelter, clothing and food. In a report written by Amy Plender, after Grenfell, the faith group's response, it was said that, in the chaos, the role of the diverse faith groups in the community stood out. Churches, mosques, synagogues and gurdwaras all stepping up to the plate, responding practically, emotionally and spiritually to a moment of pain and confusion. At least 15 separate centres run by faith communities responded. There has been ongoing support from church leaders since that night where so many loved ones lost their lives to the fire. The Right Reverend Dr. Graham Tomlin, the Anglican Bishop of Kensington, spoke recently about the ongoing support. Many people in North Kensington are living in a kind of limbo, not being able to move backwards or forwards with their lives. Many are still dealing with grief, yet grief is complicated. When you feel that your brother, mother, uncle or sister died needlessly, that responsibility for their deaths has not been recognised, and that not much has changed in 2 years. Last November, Amina Thompson, a faith-based psychotherapist, was having lunch in the basement kitchen at the Muslim Al-Manar Heritage Centre. It had become the heartbeat of the local community, as it tried to cope with the aftershocks of the tragedy. A woman was sat with a group of friends sobbing, and although sympathetic, they were insisting that she dried her eyes, saying that the time for tears had passed. After witnessing the group of Muslim women, Amina Thompson, who had already been providing counselling services to the bereaved, was prompted to offer a new type of group therapy at the mosque, the basic message of which was it was okay for Muslim women to cry in public. Thompson told me, "Some people here think that being a Muslim means that you should accept suffering and not to complain about your distress, but that's not right." She used the Quran and equated Muslim women's suffering with that of a prophet who cried after losing his son, and when questioned, he said he was only human. Amina developed a type of therapy called heartfulness, which is the balance of the mind that is restored by the tranquility of the heart. She bases it on a combination of prayers, diet, rest and exercise. Thompson jumps between the Islamic prophets and psychologists noted for their theories on attachment. 60% of the victims of the Grenfell fire were Muslim, so Amina feels there's a strong need to have a community-based therapy such as hers, as these need to work hand in hand with the NHS. However, she argues, faith and culture are clearly extremely important to these people, and that is the language and the context which they understand. The faith centres who opened their doors to the community responded well to diverse culture. They ensured that interpreters were there to help, that survivors were understood and listened to. So in conclusion, it is evident that the multicultural, faith groups were and still are instrumental within the Grenfell community. They united, providing support to the bereaved and to those who continue to struggle with complicated grief as a result of trauma.